Hello there, fearfully and wonderfully made humans. Welcome to another episode of the Holistic Counselor Podcast. It's me, Diana from Through the Valley Therapy. And today I have the pleasure of introducing a very interesting guest whose journey embodies resilience and transformation. I was captivated by an episode called Rogue Doctor Turned Poker Pro Overcomes Chronic Depression of the Radically Genuine podcast with Dr. Roderick McFillin, who I had on my show, episode 18, I think it was, where he engaged in a profound conversation with Dr. Jaclynn Moskow. Her compelling narrative of transitioning from the medical field to professional poker while overcoming chronic depression deeply resonated with me. Discovering that Dr. Moskow is based here in Florida, I felt compelled to invite her to share her inspiring story with all of you. Dr. Jaclynn Moskow, am I saying that right? Okay, just want to make sure, is a trained physician scientist, writer, healthcare business consultant, and former professional poker player. She began her career in molecular biology labs, has served as medical school faculty, and currently operates her own business, Moscow Medical Writing LLC, which provides strategic guidance and digital marketing services to ethical medical companies and healers. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jaclynn Moskow to the show. Hi.
Thank you. Hello.
All right. So you went, I know we were talking before we were started recording, and we're right next to each other, which is really cool. And we both went to Nova Southeastern University. So that's where you're a
Yeah.
MD or
A DO,
DO?
Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. Yeah.
I
I
go to it,
went,
DO.
oh,
Yeah.
you do?
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. The DO philosophy is supposed to encompass the mind, body, and spirit.
Mhm.
Although I found going through my osteopathic medical training that there was a lot of body, not so much on the mind and spirit, but at least it's
Mm.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I went to University of Pittsburgh for undergrad and studied molecular biology and chemistry and actually the history of medicine. There's a department up there for that, which doesn't exist maybe at one other school. I'm not even sure these days.
Really?
Yeah. Um, yeah, this notion that I like in order to go to med school, I had to like one have a really solid foundation on like the smallest aspects of things, molecular biology, biochemistry, microbiology, all that sort of that group of the hard sciences, and that I needed to kind of like know where we came from. So I was studying the history of medicine in undergrad, and I was working in labs. I worked in molecular bio labs for like over 10 years. And then I got to medical school and I had this very naive and I'm endeared by my past self. Not even endearing like misconception that in medical school we were going to also be covering like the
Mhm.
history of medicine, like
Right.
because how could we not? And delving really far into the hard sciences, maybe even deeper than I had in undergrad, and neither of those things were true at all.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of like a shocking discovery, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get it because for me, studying, I have a master's in mental health, and I thought we
Yeah.
were going to study the whole bit, like your how the mind and the body are all connected, but it was basically just this diagnostical statistical manual, and that was it. and
Boy.
and
Yeah.
theories, Freud's theory and other cognitive behavioral and other theories. But then I'm going, okay,
Yeah.
but how is culture playing into this? Because my
Right.
family's not from this country, right? And so I'm like, and
Yeah.
and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. But anyway, I digress, because I bet you and I
No,
could
it's
really
it's
talk
really
about
it's
that
really
a lot.
interesting. I
Mhm.
wonder how many people go through whatever sort of health care, any kind of training really,
Yeah.
in academia with like this notion that it would be quote one way. Probably most people, because we all kind of have these preconceived ideas about how things are going to be. And then when you go through it and discover that maybe it's not that way, like
Yeah.
what percentage of people then attempt to create change, or do you gaslight yourself and go, oh, we don't need that stuff? Like, I mean, it's just like an interesting question. I
Yeah.
kind of have these conversations often with people about what they think is perhaps lacking or how we could improve things. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of talk and there's
Hmm.
some action. And I'm not saying that I'm like the queen of action. Like there's things I'd love to be helping to advanced that we only have so many hours in the day. But I think that having the discourse is an important piece of it for sure. Everything starts with discourse in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. I mean, so let's talk a little bit about how you were working in labs, right?
yeah,
What were you
yeah.
studying in the labs, or what were you trying to do or create in the because I think
That's a
labs, I don't know. I'm thinking
yeah.
like, oh, someone with a, a not a telescope, a microscope.
Microscope. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think when I
Yeah.
was like real young, I had this idea that if I could understand the smallest like pieces of the universe, so to speak, like at the molecular level, atomic level, that there like would be answers, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
um and there's a degree of answers, there's probably more questions than answers, but I thought for a fair portion of my life that I was going to just be a mad scientist. And I mean, back in middle school, I had like auger plates on our back porch and I was
Wow.
doing wild things. I'm glad, my parents were encouraging of it, but I mean, it's funny, like looking back on it. And I was, growing out bacteria and testing out different antiseptics from the store and trying to like figure out, what kind of bacteria was it based on the shape that it grew and was it resistant to anything and asking questions. And then I went and competed in some like science fairs and eventually through the grapevine found that I could go down in Boca Raton, actually, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They
Mhm.
had in the 90s, like one of the only labs in the state where you could clone DNA using PCR, polymerase chain reaction. So in high school, I thought it was the coolest thing because after school, that's what I was going to do. And I then went to Pitt because they had a really strong molecular biology program and medical program up there.
Mhm.
And for 4 years, I studied something called the SV40 virus, the simian virus 40, which some people have heard of because it was a contaminant in the polio vaccine. And studied how does this virus cause a cell to become tumorigenic? How is it tumorigenic? How does it cause a cell to turn into a cancerous cell,
Okay.
essentially? And then after that, I worked in another lab studying the like neurophysiology of the vestibular system. I learned more about histology in that lab. So like making tissue samples versus in the previous lab, I was like pipetting cell cultures and purifying proteins and it was all
Wow.
like really fun. Yeah, and
Yeah.
interesting.
Like science.
And
I
during
mean,
it, I kind of realized that it was fun to play mad scientist, but I did not
mhm.
feel that I was having like a tremendous impact on the
Okay.
lives of others. And I kind of future paced myself and thought, if I just get a PhD, what
Mhm.
is my life going to look like if I work in bench research in academia? I hadn't even really considered like, what if I go work at pharma or something like that? But I had considered like, what would it look like to just be like a professor? And I thought, well, I'm watching my laboratory like mentors battle red tape. They're trying to compete for NIH grants. They're trying to make sure they have tenure. They're trying to like get things published. So they're designing experiments based on what's likely to be accepted for publication versus what's maybe the most important or interesting thing to study. They're not always the same. The Venn diagram of overlap there. So I felt like I could have a more tangible or at least immediate impact if I went and became a physician, because
Yeah.
then I could use my scientific knowledge, right, and
Yeah.
actually talk to and help human beings and not
Right.
just like hide in a lab with cell lines. So, so then I went to medical school.
Yeah.
And then there was like just a whole other series of sort of disillusioned realizations surrounding the blocks in actually providing great patient care. This is not to say that of course, we need doctors, we need
Yes.
people working in healthcare,
Right.
we need
Yes.
that. But it kind of ties into my mental health journey was during all
Mhm.
of this, I would say my mental health from the time I was like in high school down to college and med school and the working years just was doing this
Yeah. Okay.
linearly going
Yeah.
downwards. And so by the time I finished medical school, I was well over 100 pounds overweight. I was extremely depressed. I was actually having like quite a bit of suicidal ideation and I was kind of like in a spiritual crisis. I was in every sort of crisis, right? Mind, body, spirit, mental health, physical health,
Yeah.
spiritual, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And so my decision to then pause, which ended up being me playing poker for a living for 7 years, that
Okay.
decision was rooted
Yeah.
in part in part, not just in the disillusionment of the healthcare system, which when you're in a negative state, you're going to more easily grasp onto the problems as opposed to how
Yes.
can I create solutions,
Right.
but also in realizing that if I continued and I went into residency where I'd be expected to work like 60, 80-hour weeks, maybe more
Yes.
depending, that I probably like wouldn't, honestly, just to be like blunt, wouldn't survive it. Like that,
Mm.
if one way or another my health
Yeah.
was going to get me or I was going to get myself. So I
Mhm.
stopped.
Oh yeah, good.
And yeah.
Right? It was a good thing. And honestly, let me just stop you right there because what you're
Yeah.
talking, like my listeners, some of them are my clients, and I
Yeah.
do help
Awesome.
them through
I
this
love it.
because some of them have gone through their schooling and they're in their
Yeah.
first year of their work, right? So say for example a nurse who now has gone through their first year and they're realizing so much stuff now, they're overwhelmed, but they have that
Yeah. It's
pressure
overwhelming.
because they spent the money that now,
Yes.
and they are trying to do the right thing to help the humans, that's the, that was their
Yeah.
passion.
That's why we go into it.
And now they're in crisis, right? so
Yeah.
th- so there's people that are listening right now that has gone the same exact thing, Dr. Moscow, same exact thing you've
You're
now
giving me goosebumps hearing that. I just like, I
okay,
just
so
love the way the
but
universe
but
works.
you made it through. You made it
Yeah.
through.
Oh,
So right
yeah.
now, for that
Yeah.
person that's going, no, no, I know what you're talking about. Now I'm in a crisis. Now I have parents. I don't know if this is what happened with you,
Right.
but I have like
Right.
people or parents or the bill of the school or
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, I
all
had
this.
300K of student loans. Like, there's no question to many people when they're in that amount of debt and they've gone through that
Yeah.
amount of years that the
Yeah.
only thing they're allowed to do is
Mm-hmm.
continue the path.
Right.
I'm not going to tell people like don't ever continue the
Right.
path. We're all different. So many
Yes.
factors. Everyone's situation
Yes.
is different. But I will say in my case, making
Yes.
the bold decision
Mm-hmm.
to go against all expectation
Yeah.
and trust my intuition,
Mm-hmm.
like it saved my life, it changed my life, it bettered my life. Like
Fuck yeah.
there's another side to it all, right? Like I'm constantly waking up thinking, wow, like just how lucky am I to be alive? How lucky am I for this and this and this and this and this, and how higher things compared to the low, which gave me context, the low.
Mhm.
But yeah, there is like always the possibility to live a much happier, healthier life than you ever imagined. Like no
Yeah.
matter where we're at, always.
Yeah, right. So how'd you do
Yeah.
it? Like, can I bring you back to when you were that younger self
Yeah.
and just for a minute
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
like, you're in that crisis, your
Yeah.
mind, everything's about to shut down because this is when people
Yes.
decide to call me. Like, honestly, I'm like, if you could just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if people
Well, thank
listening
God.
right
I'm so
now.
glad that they are calling you. Thank God.
Well, yeah, no, and I'm grateful too. I'm grateful that I'm able to help, but it's also when you have that person in crisis, there's ways or things or red flags that have been ignored. And to me, like looking back, I bet you have
Yeah.
some aha moments like, oh, if you can't change it because this is who how you became so resilient. Right. It led you to the poker playing, which we're gonna get to because that to me, I'm like, what
It's
is that?
unusual, right? Yeah.
Right. Yes. And honestly, I had a crisis too, not with me, but with my child. And after that, I ended up in the film industry in South Florida for about
Oh,
6 years
really?
before I ended up going back to being a therapist.
Oh, good. That's
So,
good. I mean, these experiences will just
right.
give you so much enrichment in a sense and
But we
perspective.
now, like you look back and now that you
Yeah.
are able to breathe and now that you have become a better version of yourself. But what about the person that is listening and they feel stuck, because I felt stuck before and obviously
Right.
you felt stuck. What was the thing or what was it that all of a sudden made you realize like I got to do something? And what was your first steps to do that?
Yeah. I mean, there was I don't know if evolution is the right word, but there was sort of an evolution. It was a process. It was not any one singular moment, although there were plenty of moments that stand out where I like really had to just like pause and think, like, is this the path? How do I get out of this path?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah, one component of it was that I was intending to become a psychiatrist. And so I had done these externships where I went to psych hospitals for like a month here or 2 months there to learn. And I had gone up to some good psych hospitals, University of Pittsburgh Western Psych, to Yale, to University of Rochester, Strong Memorial. And in having chosen that psychiatry specifically was the thing that I was interested in, and it kind of gave me, in a way, an easier out because when I really, really thought about it and I really looked at the way that psychiatric patients were treated in these facilities and
Mm,
the medical decision making and the lack of concern for aspects outside of how do we pathologize this and pick the right drug, I felt like I would, in many cases, be doing more harm than good by getting involved in these people's lives in the way that the psychiatric model currently
mm,
operates. Now, at the same time, I myself was a psych patient. So I was going on, I don't know if you know Dr. Kendra Campbell. She calls it the medication merry-go-round. She's one of my friends. So the
okay.
holistic psychiatrist, right? Free range. She says it's the medication merry-go-round. So this medication merry-go-round of try this drug, try this drug, add this dose,
Hmm.
it was like I was a patient at the same time that I was becoming a doctor to treat that type of patient.
Wow.
And it was the perfect display in front of me of um, all of the, how do I word this? All it's like the culmination of all of the different types of issues in healthcare. It really comes through in psychiatry for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
Um, because that one piece of it all, I think made it a little bit easier for me to leave because even if I had felt good, is what I'm getting at, I couldn't in good conscience go through traditional training because there is no way when you're a resident, when you're becoming a specialist,
Hmm.
to diverge too far from what they call the standard of care. And
Mm,
so if I had believed, hey, I think with some of these patients, we should first try this thing, this dietary intervention, this, why don't we like just talk to them in today and not start them at any of that? I would not have had the flexibility within medical training to do any of that. You have
yeah.
to kind of follow the guidelines and you have to do what you're attending, like the doctors above you want.
Right.
Once you get out, you have more freedom. But because I knew that I was going to have to follow these like really rigid protocols that I didn't believe in, it made it a little easier to leave.
Okay.
But again, even if I had not felt that way, and even if um, I did wholeheartedly believe in everything about the current psychiatric care model, I still would have needed to, and hopefully would have in theory in this like alternate universe scenario, deferred to taking care of myself first. And taking care of myself first meant I had to walk away from that. There is no way when you're in like a crisis of mental health and like I said, physical and spiritual health to then go spend 68 hours a week working in a
Right.
program that is putting extreme pressure on you in like a toxic environment. A lot of times I think when we really like you're telling me people reach out to you when it's like kind of like the final straw situation, like in
Right.
crisis.
Yes.
A lot of times in crisis, not always, a lot of times in crisis, is such a extreme part of the human experience that you're going to need to often take sometimes, and I'm very careful not to speak in absolutes, an extreme route or extreme solution in
Mm-hmm.
order to pull yourself out of it. And that could
Right.
look like leaving a job. It could look like changing career trajectories. It could look like, walking away from a toxic relationship. It could like sometimes that's what it takes. Not
Yes.
always.
No, you're right.
So
It is something to have that understanding, like because what I tell some of my clients that are come to me and they're having a breakdown. I tell them they're having a breakthrough.
yeah,
It's not a
right.
breakdown, it's a
Right.
breakthrough. And they're like, wait, what? But I'm feeling this A, B, C, and D. I'm like, yeah, that dark night of the soul that you're having right now,
Right.
it is something that
Right.
you're either going to choose it for it to overcome and master you, or you're going to learn to master it because this is part of life,
Yeah.
these ups and
Right.
downs, right? And what are we going to do? And how are we going, how are we going to get in tune and go into your intuition, right?
Yeah.
And how are we going to settle our system? Like there's so much out because that's the psychiatric like I've been very vocal about it for a long, long time because I was working at alternative high schools in Broward County.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So most of my
Wow.
career, yeah. So working with teenagers in high schools, you're seeing where I'm going now. right? And
Yeah.
then I'm
Yeah.
also a woman of color, as you can see. And so I'm
Yeah.
seeing certain things happening more towards a certain group of people going, wait, what? Why are we just all of a sudden medicating? And why do you care more about the medication than actually what's happening at home? They're,
It's
you
so
know,
infuriating. Yes.
right. Okay. So like you get that. So, but because you were in the medical field, right? You were,
Yeah.
you're a doctor and you had to
Yeah.
see, I have to ask this question. How much
Yeah.
nutrition did they teach you?
We did not have a nutrition course in my medic at my medical school. We didn't have a nutrition course. We had a day or two where we talked about the biochemistry of vitamins, and particularly with vitamins, we talked about which vitamins can you take too much of, like which vitamins can you OD on, and what would happen if that happened
Mm,
medically, and then
mhm.
which vitamins could you become deficient in, and what are the clinical manifestations of a deficiency of a vitamin. So in medical school, everything's always about, it's not really about health. It's, it's not healthcare, it's sick care. Everything in medical school is about disease. So it's not about what is like a homeostasis, health,
Right.
happy,
Balance.
whatever
Hmm.
situation look like. It's like, what's the extreme thing that could happen? How do we find it and how do we treat it? So yeah, there's not a lot of, and I know some medical schools are moving towards
Functional,
including more
integrative.
preventative,
Right. Yeah.
functional, integrative,
Right.
all of these terms. Like I love them, and like most of my friends that are in healthcare identify with those sorts of labels in their practice. But I also have to laugh because it's like, why do we need to have these specific words to indicate that a doctor is going to look for the root cause? Like, why do we need to clarify that
Right.
like this is about avoiding medication if at all possible? Like, why isn't
Yeah.
that the baseline of how
Exactly.
healthcare
Well,
is practiced? It's wild.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like going into a grocery store and there's a health food section. Well,
Yeah,
what's the rest of the flipping
exactly.
grocery store?
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's
it's like there's a
ridiculous.
health food. I'm like,
Exactly.
wait a minute. So what is the rest of it? But anyway, I want to know because you said something that you studied the history
Yeah.
of medicine. And I did
Yeah.
I haven't studied it completely because I'm a therapist, but I've heard here and there the Rockefeller thing and just how things changed back in the early something. I don't know if that's the history you were taught or like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're referring to the Flexner report, which was a report that I believe was funded by the Rockefellers. I haven't thought about this in a bit, but it kind of like shut down any school that was not essentially adhering to this idea that pharmaceuticals are the only way to address a disease. This was over 100 years ago at this point.
Right.
That is a point at which things changed in a sense. I remember actually, it's ironic that you asked me about history of medicine in that context and that because I remember having this history of medicine professor who was like so adamant that we understand that every school that got shut down by that report was what he called filled with quacks. He always used that word.
Mm-hmm.
And I just even remember back then, before I'd gone through all this, when I was like 20, half my life ago, I remember thinking like, guy seems really, really, really committed to this idea that like we had to stop exploring any alternative means
Mm.
of addressing health issues. And I even remember, I guess I've always been maybe a little bit, I don't want to say conspiratorial, I just like question everything. I even remember thinking like, why is he so committed to this idea and who told him to be committed to the idea and where did that person hear the information, like because it's just like you hear people defend notions and you see it in healthcare so often, especially amongst
Mhm.
physicians and scientists, no, more so physicians, where they sound like they're defending like their religion.
It
Like they
they have to believe in it. I mean, and I kind of, I mean, I get it. I have people like,
yeah.
like I understand, like if you don't, and I was just talking to a friend of mine who's not in healthcare at all, but she, it was about another friend who is in healthcare. And it's like you go to them and they're like, oh, here, I'll write you something, or here's an antibiotic. It's because
Yeah.
that's the way they have to pay their bills. They got to believe in it's. And I said, it's kind of like a prosecute or a lawyer who's defending a serial killer. He's got to kind of
Yeah.
like believe, right? Believe in what at least
You
some
have
kind of
to.
something to be able to get that person off, even though we all know that all the evidence is there still. But it's like,
Yeah.
and I have to say, like,
Yeah.
I do know medicine that has helped people. I do. But
Oh yeah, there are great
right,
pharmaceuticals out there.
right.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want to be, I'm not that, like, we're not conspiratorial, like you said, like both of us. It's just more of like having this understanding that why is that coming first instead of trying to find other alternative or understanding like what's really going on with you. Why did you have chronic depression? Did you
Right.
figure that out now? Like now that you look back, do you understand why everything was happening and now you were feeling a certain way?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. My brain's racing. I was like, I was going to explain to you why. Okay, we'll get back to the concept of why pharmaceuticals are so
Mm.
have so much pull. Okay, in terms of my journey,
Mm-hmm.
why? Okay, so this is an interesting point, I guess. It brings me to an interesting point. We as clinicians are sort of taught to look for the why in a very with a very narrow lens, like a very tunnel visioned, like what is the why? Now, when I was working in molecular biology labs, I very much understood that cells are like infinitely complex and you can have a protein that upregulates a protein, turns it up, and it also downregulates a different protein, turns it down, but it depends on the concentration and it depends on the pH and it depends on the temperature and it depends like there's
So
an
much.
infinite number of factors in a way. And when I was playing poker for a living, I also constantly was aware of the fact that complex decision making must include consideration to many factors and then weighing each like piece probabilistically. In medicine, however, we often want to believe there's a magic bullet for everything. Because so it's a lot of reasons why, but when you're in medical school and you take a test, there's an ABCD answer, right? It's like, which drug do you pick, right? Or whatever. What is the most likely side effect of the one that you picked?
Right.
um, and so the current traditional model of psychiatry is very reductionistic, right? And it forces, in a way, those that play along to uh, pick a drug or pick two drugs or pick three drugs in combination, play with the doses. And it is it's like in other aspects of health in the body, things are a bit more straightforward. The heart is a pump, and you can kind of turn it down if you have to, use a beta blocker.
Mm-hmm.
But with the brain, it like what does that mean? Is it the brain, the mind, the soul, the being? Like we can't reduce it down to molecules. We just can't. However, in most cases, in most cases. However, in order for psychiatry to exist in medicine, we have to have medicines. In order to give someone a medicine, you have to have a diagnostic code for the insurance to pay you back for that medicine. The medicine must be approved for a certain condition. So now we're getting into why things, in a way, are as narrow as they are. If we are going to give someone a pill because they're depressed, then we need to look at depression as something that can be addressed pharmaceutically. If we're going to do that, we need to like theorize about why it is this way, right? They really push this idea of depression, anxiety being because of serotonin deficiency. It's not true. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. And so we tried to like medicalize the human experience, and it's just caused a cascade of problems, right? It's caused a cascade
Yeah.
of problems for some people. For many people, so in terms of your actual question, which was what was causing me to feel the way that I did, while
Mhm.
there were many psychiatrists involved in my story that would tell you that I had a chemical imbalance, I don't know what that particularly even means, what was really going on. Like, sure, were chemicals in my body at suboptimal levels? Yes, because I wasn't eating well, I wasn't exercising, I wasn't getting sunlight, I wasn't sleeping enough. Um,
And no doctor
and
brought that up ever?
no, no,
No, no.
no.
Ay,
Well,
ay,
once
ay.
I like down the road, I ended up getting ketamine infusions, which you can talk about later if you want. But
Mhm,
basically, at that point, I did actually have a psychiatrist tell me, like, why don't you also do these other things at the same
mhm,
time? But back when I was on, all of these different psych meds,
yeah.
I've tried a lot of psych meds over
Mhm,
those years. It was always you have this disease. And in the very beginning, I bought into it for a bit. You have this
yeah.
disease. I thought, oh no, I have a disease, right? So
Right.
that means that something is different about my body than other people's. And it's this idea that you genetically maybe were predisposed, which I mean, yeah, genetics play a factor,
Sure
epigenetics play
does.
a factor, the
Right.
environment plays a factor, your diet plays a factor, right?
Right.
That I was like, just it gives a lot of patients this idea that they're just
Mhm.
like doomed, that they like
Yeah,
something
for
about
sure.
them personally
And it's their
sets them
fault
up
or
to,
yes.
yeah. And
Hmm.
that like that they're like cursed and they have this like sentence that they have this disease, these labels. It's important, I think, for people to understand many of these labels exist because of what I spoke about earlier, which is the need to assign a word in order for a drug to go through, the need to assign a word in order for a like biller to hit the right code for the insurance to pay. What I think has happened is that we have labeled everyone and their mom, as they say that expression, right, with these disorders, and it's caused a lot of harm because it becomes self-fulfilling, and start to believe I am this word, and these things about me are broken, and it's something that I just am gonna always have to battle and think about, and it's going to affect my life forever in one way or another. And it just becomes a part of people's identity, right?
Hmm.
And it's just like, I don't know, it's just very sad. It's very sad, but while it can be useful to have terms to speak about things, right? Like we like to have in the
Well,
English
yeah,
language helps us out,
exactly.
right?
Right.
Right. It can
Yeah.
be like, and there are people that are, paranoid and hallucinating that
Yeah.
fit what we call schizophrenia. Like that's like, I think the part, like most precise example with these mental health words, maybe where there's like accuracy. Also with personality
Right.
disorders, there are people that have these common symptoms or
Right.
presentations. But when we start talking about some of these other terms, it's
Right.
all spectrum. It's all spectrum. So this
Yeah.
depression and the anxiety and the bipolar and bipolar 2 became like the most popular diagnosis right when certain medications were approved to treat that, right?
Hmm.
You can see that when certain medications were put out, suddenly a lot of people were called that particular thing.
Right.
It's happened time and again, time again.
It's same with
Um,
ADHD. It's the same now with the new one because every time that DSM comes out, I'm like, oh, what's the new thing that's going to be like
oh
really
gosh,
pushed?
goodness.
And to
Right.
me, I mean, they started doing it with us women with the PMDD or
Oh,
what is
right.
it?
Yeah, PMDD.
Like
Yeah.
something dysphoric disorder, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is something that us women go through, and you guys don't like it. No, I'm just kidding. Like, it's like, and
Yeah, in a sense, yeah, it's like we're not supposed to feel the same way every day
right.
of the month as females
Yeah. And it is
because
taking
our
care. Yeah.
hormones are wildly different
Right.
every day of the
Right.
month. If you're cycling, if you're between,
Right. Yeah.
teenage years to menopause, then your hormones are quite different every
Exactly.
day of the month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every month. I mean, and this is what I talk to with my women clients. I'm like, so what season are you in? What do you mean, Diana? I'm like,
Aw.
are you in winter, spring, summer, or fall of your month?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so when it's time for winter, it's okay that you're going to feel sad. I try
Yeah.
to normalize, okay, there's sad, and then there is clinical depression where it is depression, where you just cannot, no matter
Yeah.
what you do, no matter how you eat, no matter how you drink, no matter what's happening, and you're just there, okay, there's something going on. That's when I think, all right, let's really go to a psychiatrist that gets the whole body, mind, body, spirit,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
functional doctor, and really
Yeah.
work on this. And okay. But nowadays, I just see everybody wanting, you know, it's the nocebo effect too. If the doctor just comes in after 20 minutes being with you and says, okay, well, you have clinical depression, here's your meds, and you only got to know them one time, there's something wrong with the system.
Yeah. And um absolutely. And it's not possible to like really convey very much to a doctor, right, about your
No,
entire life and
right.
past and history and current experiences and
Yeah.
lifestyle habits and what like maybe an introductory appointment might be an hour, half an hour. I don't know in most practices what they're doing, but it's like you may find yourself that day talking more about your anxiety, but it
Hmm.
might be that your anxiety was higher that day because you're in a doctor's office, whereas the thing that you actually came to that office for was something else. Maybe you came because you weren't focusing well, but then all of a sudden you've left with a, these
Yeah.
doctors often ask very leading questions and you can kind of take people down a tunnel um, where they're
And
going to
yeah,
come
and I
out
want
the
to,
other side of the diagnosis.
right. And I want to say that, like it's the insurance model too, because it's like you have to
Right.
have a certain amount of clients because now you have to pay the bills. You have to, and it's, you have to be able to do this to make it affordable living for yourself or whatever. Like it is
Yeah.
so let's just shift a little and I want to
Yeah.
understand what were the effective treatments for you? What were the effective strategies or mindset that helped you shift and regain control of your life?
Yeah. Okay. It was a process and there were a lot of pieces to it. So as I mentioned, started, or I alluded to it. I started exercising. I changed my diet. I started sleeping and I started getting sunlight. All of those things were important. Now, mindset wise, at some point, I realized that I was playing a much bigger role in my mood and situation than I had wanted to acknowledge.
Hmm.
That I was, in a way, very attached to the idea that I had these mental health conditions labels, that I was attached to the idea that I'd been through trauma and that it was shaping me and like it was kind of always going to shape me in a way that made it such that I couldn't have a normal, whatever that means, life. That I was hung up on stories from the past and that I was kind of addicted in a way to the idea of suffering and to the idea that I suffered. And
Hmm.
that I also at times was like, not really I don't know, I wouldn't have wanted to be around me during this period of time. God bless anyone that like tried or, was because
Wow.
I mean, I was so aggressively pushing people away that were trying to help because I
Mhm.
was really attached to the idea that I couldn't be helped. And so if you know, what you believe becomes what is, in a sense.
Yeah.
So I at some point really saw that holding on to like this victim mentality was only going to harm me. Like I wasn't gonna like win a victim award. I wasn't gonna like solve my life's problems uh by wallowing.
Mm.
And I just had to, yeah, deeply examine the ways in which I was perpetuating aspects of it all. Not to say that there wasn't like a real
Yeah.
thing going on. I really was suffering, but I was also kind of attached to the fact that I suffered, right? Like I would go lie in bed and kind of throw a pity party and think about how awful everything is. And
Yeah.
while there is an aspect of that that could be outside of one's control when they're in a very dark place, and sometimes you do need to just like lie in bed and hide, I guess, but maybe. But it also can become like a unhealthy coping strategy. Like you can
Yeah.
um kind of stand in your own way. So I was standing in my own way a
Mm.
lot.
Yeah.
And so once I realized that and I was okay with like accepting that like nasty feeling in your stomach that like you're part of the problem, right? But you're like, I don't want it to be me. Right?
Right. Or
It
that you have a
really
choice
like
to do something about it. Like you finally realize, right? Like you're going,
it created more of a path out. Like once I
okay.
was like, okay, like I'm part of the problem. I don't really want to be part of the problem. What if I like try to help myself, right?
Right.
It made it easier. Like, I mean, we overcomplicate things as humans, and I think that is I think that statement I just made, we overcomplicate things in humans, may even resonate more so with people that maybe find themselves caught up in the mental health system because we are. uh complex beings, but those of us that have now or at any point felt as if our own minds were attacking us in a way,
Yes.
we probably think at a like, maybe
Yeah.
a little a large, I don't want to say a larger quantity of thoughts, a deeper amount of thoughts. We're just like thinkers. We just think and we think, we think, we
Yes.
think, we overthink. Just common,
Yes.
like like
Rumination, overthinking,
right.
and it's creativity. That's how I
Yeah,
see it because
yeah,
even, I say the word creative, people automatically think artist, oil painter, or musician, and
yeah,
they're very. I work with quite a few creatives, but for those that are like science minded, it's that,
yeah.
and question why and like and
Right.
and you're thinking like how why because I have the thing is I grew up with parents or a family that didn't trust any healthcare system. Like, honestly, my mom a couple of years ago got hit by a truck and broke two of her vertebrae, and she was like, "I'm not going to the doctor." I'm like,
Oh
they
my
forced her to the
goodness.
emergency
Yeah,
room,
sometimes you
got
gotta go to
out.
the doctor, guys.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of mentality of like it isn't religion or anything like that. It's just the I came here, I'm strong, nothing's gonna let me down, and I'm not gonna ask the government for anything. Like that was my
Yeah.
that's what I was. But for you, like what it sounded like, especially at a young age, if somebody was diagnosed at a young age, or you saw it in your own family lineage of a
Yeah.
behavior, okay,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
right, and it's whatever fires together in your brain, wires together, and so if you don't know any other way out, you just don't at that moment, and so
Right.
something must have just you realize it was either life or death for you, right? It was either like, if I
Yeah.
keep going on this road, I'm going to just end up really in a bad place, so maybe I need to take a step back and listen and go, all right, let me learn about my body. Let me learn
Yeah.
why am I thinking these things and challenging them. Because I get it. I grew up, with some complex PTSD,
Yeah.
and I could go in my story, and I did wallow and I did self-medicate,
Yeah.
right? Like we try to figure this stuff out. And then the thing is, like when you go to a professional, you're trusting, you're giving money and you're
Right.
also trusting the
Yeah.
degree because they're the ones who did the work to find the information to help you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But I try to get people,
Definitely.
right? But so let's see how would you balance that? Like, because it is, you know, you've gone through it, Dr.
Yeah.
Moskow, you've gone through it, and you came. Now you're somewhere else. Like the second I saw you, I'm like, you have this light about you. There's this
Thank
shine
you.
about you. Yeah, there's no, But now that we both have gone through some stuff, but we
Yeah.
have a younger generation, and I mean, I know it because I work with it a lot, and I'm sure you're
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are suffering. Quarter life crisis is what I call a lot of my 25-year-olds that are coming to me, and they're in a quarter life crisis, not a midlife crisis. So how would you, Dr. Moscow, are you still there? Uh-oh. Hello?
Okay, I think I got you back. I lost
Okay.
connection for a second there.
That's
I
okay.
heard you ask, you said how, we have a younger generation that's
Mhm.
suffering.
So what
Okay.
would you say to them? How would you encourage them? Someone like, I can encourage my younger, like if there's 20-year-old, or with the things I
Yeah.
went through, because it was anxiety for me. Like for you it was
Yeah.
depression, but anxiety, like, whoa.
Oh no, I had anxiety too. I mean, honestly, no, I was given all kinds of labels. I was given OCD first, and then generalized anxiety
Mm,
disorder, panic disorder, sexual
mm,
overload disorder, major depressive disorder, CTPD, ADHD, and autism. I literally was labeled with every single thing I just listed at one point or another. So yeah.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Okay.
maybe the autism one. I don't know, but maybe I
I
don't.
love
It doesn't
that.
matter. It doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
it's I don't feel the need to label everything. Oh, that is one thing I would say actually to anyone that's suffering is like right now there's this environment. I see it on social media. I see people talking about their diagnoses and putting like their hashtags in their profile and really like believing that the diagnosis is an integral part of their life, and it's not to downplay the fact that we all have to varying degrees of suffering, and that there are diagnoses and that there are conditions and that they can interfere with your life. All of that is true. Like we can definitely have mental health and physical health conditions that are interfering with their life. However, I think at this exact moment in time, there's like it's a little bit out of balance the degree to which we are almost celebrating them.
Mm.
And again, it's not celebrating in a way like, hey, I have this thing and I'm going to go crush the world anyway. It's more like celebrating, maybe that wasn't the best term to pick, but I see a lot of people grasp onto these labels and almost like introduce themselves to people with the label. Like it's like it ties in a little bit to like this trend of like I just identity in general being something where we have to like uber define ourselves in all kinds of ways. And someone might say like I'm this race, I'm this religion, I have this sexual preference, I'm this
Mhm.
whatever, and it's like and I have these diagnoses. I would say one is to be like very cautious of taking any of that diagnosis wise and then like kind of holding onto it and hugging it and believing that that is your being.
Mm.
I think that we are boxing ourselves in when we do that, and that we are also kind of giving it too much power. That's really the best way to put it.
Right.
Giving this condition and this term, which as I spoke of earlier, a lot of these terms exist in part because of pharma and because of health insurance and because of this and because of that.
Hmm.
And then holding ourselves in by by
Yeah.
using that label. So that
Right.
is just one aspect of it. And I say this because also during the time that I suffered really deeply, I found that I was talking to a lot of other people that suffered really deeply, that I was befriending people that kind of shared my diagnosis, that I was, commiserating via text message, like with people. Although in the very beginning of my story, we weren't even texters, like, right? I'm in my 40s. But with people like, oh yeah, depression is awful
Mhm.
because of this, and people
Right.
don't get it because of that. And like that feeding into it will harm you, and it really will. Like
Yeah.
misery loves company, and a lot of times we will magnetize the people into our life that it's not to say that it's wrong to have people in your life that are also going through something. It's just
Right.
that if
Right.
if you find yourself in a situation where everyone that you talk to, on a daily basis is also like really, really, really struggling to get by, it's going to be really hard to break out of that.
Yeah, because people don't want to feel like they're alone. I get it. Community is very
Yeah.
important. I get like
Yeah.
why people need community. It is though,
Yes.
what is the community doing for you? Fine. If you're 10
Yeah.
people that are depressed, wonderful, but what are you doing to get out of it?
That's what it is. Yes. It's
Right.
not to say don't have friends that are sad. Like, please
Right.
be friends with people that are sad. Like, we
Yeah.
need everyone, we
Yeah.
should, all care each other. But there has to be,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, you can't give from an empty cup. So if you
Right.
are kind of like at your rock bottom and
Hmm.
someone else near you is at the rock bottom and someone else near you is at your rock bottom, like who's giving in that situation? Like when, like, I'm like you said, I'm sort of like in a really good place
Right.
in this chapter of my life. I can give. Like I can have, if someone's suffering, I could talk to them, and I'm overflowing. I could give, but I would hope that people that are, struggling would reach out to someone that's in a state where they can give. However, a lot of times when you're struggling, it's like a catch
Hmm.
22 because you don't want to talk to the person that's like
No.
obnoxious and wearing a flowery shirt and bubbly and happy because like they don't get it. Like, what do they get it?
Yeah.
They don't understand
Right.
suffering. They don't understand like how things
Yeah.
are. Like, I pushed so many people away that were like well
Yeah.
adjusted and happy years back
Right.
because I wasn't those things. And
Right.
then later I like felt better and told them like, hey, that was obnoxious of me. I'm sorry. Thank you for trying. Like
Aw.
I should have like called you more often or written you back more, but I just wasn't in a place to hear the positivity. Right.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I guess I mean, I don't wish anything was different. I think everything's exactly as it needs to be. But
Yeah.
in theory, if I
Hmm.
had been a little bit more receptive to the people in my life that were doing better than me, better
Hmm.
mentally, I maybe would have snapped out of it a bit faster. But I was talking to a lot of people who also were just in the pits of hell, so to speak, and also were just
Yeah.
like in a very dark place, and was it was no good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you realized that you had a choice and you were not stuck, basically. Like you realized
Yeah,
sitting in that dark time or that darkness and that heaviness. And I mean, I get it. It is like you found some kind of glimmer of hope because to me, or faith, I have no idea, but there's
yeah,
something
well,
that
it's
has
all, yeah,
shifted, right? It's something that
yeah,
shifts inside. I know when I was going through these times as well, it had to be something where it's like, this is why I love, faith, hope, and love. Like I ended up having faith that gave me hope that
oh,
made me able to love better
yeah,
myself and
yeah,
others. Right. And so,
yeah.
I mean, I think I could sit and talk. I still have like 10,000 more questions, but time is up
It's
and I
okay.
know like with the listeners, I'm not Joe Rogan, so I can't sit here for 4 hours straight.
Okay.
But if you can leave the listener with just one piece of advice for their mental health journey, what would it be?
Yeah. Just one. Okay, let me think about this for a second.
Yeah.
Okay. You're under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. That's like a famous quote, I believe, or there's some variation of it
I
that I've
I
heard
love that.
before. It's true. We tend to hold on to all of these stories like we're hoarding and collecting stories from our life. Some of those stories are like projected onto you from other people. They're stories of trauma. The past is like this funny collection of memories, and it's all like oddly weighted. And like some things stand out as like so important, and some things like we don't even remember happening, but maybe were they important? I don't know. And some things like we know the feeling that went along with that part of our life, but we couldn't tell you the details. Like a lot of people that are suffering are holding on to this like package of distorted stories and other people's stories. We don't have to honor it. Essentially, I used to think that like all pieces and chapters and parts of my life were so critically important that it was almost like disrespectful to them to like not think about them or not remember that I went there or not think like it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter if you think that you like I don't know did this thing wrong or whatever 10 years ago and that this other person is thinking of this about you. They're probably not thinking about that you. They're not even thinking about you. Like you just let it go. Like I guess that's the thing. It's kind of like with the I went to medical school but I don't practice medicine. I have a business, whatever. Like who cares? Like it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't like right? It doesn't matter that uh any of it. I don't know. Like you can kind of just whatever brings you joy, that's what matters. Love matters. I think a lot of mental health suffering comes from, in a sense, like holding on to the past and pain and trauma. And a lot of times it's coming from a place of, but those things are important. But if you don't want them to be important, then they're not important. Like it's kind of meaning is where you assign it.
Yeah.
So if you want to decide in this exact moment that you're reclaiming your power, then just do it. Just do it and take action and move forward and don't look backwards. Like
Yeah.
that's it, I think.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's a great piece of advice. So, listener, I hope that you have listened to this and thank you if
Yeah,
you
thanks
have
everyone
all
for
the way.
listening. Thank you all for being
Yes.
here.
Yeah, for sure. And so don't ever forget to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.